like to peruse the VN Dev subreddit every once in a while, and I'll often see a thread that goes something like this. How would you feel about a visual novel that has X, Y, and Z? Or how would you feel about a visual novel with this art style? Or very often, is this visual novel idea any good? And I don't really like answering those threads because I feel like they're not a question people should be asking me. They should ask the chart. That's right, this chart will tell you if your game idea is the next indie hit or if it will disappear into the depths of itch.io. Now, quick disclaimer, the chart isn't a steadfast law. It's not even a tried and true method with a pedigree of successes behind it. It's just some crap I saw on LinkedIn from Anton Slashev, where he took a mangled version of the Japanese concept of ikigai and mushed it together with some business school nonsense. But it's still coming from someone incredibly knowledgeable in the games industry, and it encompasses a lot of the suggestions I make for students and first-time devs. It's a framework that lets you evaluate your ideas and assess if it's worth your time building them to fruition. So let's take a look at it. According to the chart, the 4 elements of a great game idea is it's a fun concept, it's a game with player demand, monetization potential, and something your team has expertise in. Fun concept is a bit of a misnomer here. What they mean is it's a game that you want to make. If it's an idea where you think, wow, I would love to make that game, then bam, you got it. Players' demand means, are there players who are asking for this sort of game? It's not enough that they'd like a game like yours, they need to demand it. They may really like Muv-Luv, but are they asking for another game like it, or do they have enough of them in their Steam library to keep them busy? Monetization potential means, can my game idea make money? Think about your game idea and try to figure out how long it would take to make, how much money it would take to make, and how you can make the money back to recoup your losses and earn a profit. You'd think this would be pretty one-to-one with players' demand, and it's definitely connected, which we'll get to, but this is more about the larger sense of how your game can ultimately make money. Finally, team expertise is, can you and your team actually make your game idea? I hear from tons of game devs who want to make AAA level games, and that's not always possible, just because of the sheer amount of time and work that it would take to create certain types of games. Like, tons of people want to make elaborate RPGs, but not everyone understands even solo efforts like Undertale and Stardew Valley still took years of full-time work for these solo developers to finish. Visual novels are simple to program, which attracts a lot of first-time devs, but if your game idea needs an engaging story and beautiful art, but you can't write, and you have no design sensibilities, you don't have the expertise. So those are the basic building blocks of this chart, but how all those different elements come together is where we really get into the meat and potatoes of how we can evaluate your idea and see if it's worth doing. Okay, so you have a game idea, you go, yeah, it's a fun concept, players demand it, I can definitely make it, and this will make $1 bajillion. I'm ready to make it. Whoa, let's take a second there, and let's take the time to evaluate your idea and see how these different sections come together. Team expertise and a fun concept suggest you have a vision. A fun concept and a player demand suggests you have some insight. Player demand and monetization potential mean that you have some market strategy. And monetization potential and team expertise means you have a strategy. Now again, I want to stress for the second time, this is some crap I got off of LinkedIn. None of this is scientific, it's just a fun framework to think through your idea and figure out if it's worth the time and effort to proceed moving forward with it. We good? We understand? Because otherwise I have to make a tutorial video on SWOT analysis and I don't want to do that. You don't want to watch that. Let's do the colorful chart. It's got colors. So to start, insight means that you have a fun concept and it aligns with players' demand because you understand who your target audience is, what they want in a game like yours, and how to meet or exceed their expectations. So first, figure out what genre of game your idea is. Probably a visual novel because you're watching this channel right now and you're definitely going to subscribe. Then figure out the subgenre of your idea. Is it a dating sim, survival game, horror, or some sort of visual novel hybrid with another genre? Once you figure that out, find at least 3 of the most popular recent games that have come out in that genre and play them. If you come up with an idea in this subgenre, you may have already played them. Once you've played them, write a list of observable qualities that both you and other players found fun, changes people wanted to see in those games, and common elements all the games shared. If you see something in 3 different games in the same genre, players will probably expect it to be there in your game. Now compare that list of qualities with the qualities your game idea would have. If your game idea does not have a list of qualities, flesh out your idea a bit more and build one up. So now that you have these 2 lists, see where your game idea qualities align with your observation list, and they should be pretty similar with one another. Ideally, you want your game idea to have everything on your observation list and more, but if there are things your game concept doesn't have from that list, you better have a really good reason why. While insight is something you can get an innate sense of by just, engaging with games of the subgenre, market research is work. First, figure out where you intend to distribute your game, whether through Steam, through consoles like the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation or Xbox digital marketplaces, Google Play or Apple mobile markets, or wherever else you want to distribute your game. You need to look at other games in your game idea's subgenre and make some decent estimations of their profits in your chosen storefronts, and hazard some guesses on what qualities about those games resulted on the most return on investment, or ROI. There are a few calculators you can find for these online that estimate games profits based on their price, total number of games sold, wish lists, and other factors. So let's run through a Steam calculator right now. So let's try figuring out the profit for Needy Streamer Overload. And this one's really basic. All we're gonna do is we're gonna take the number of reviews, which is 39,977, and then we'll put in the price, which is normally $15.99. Now, obviously, this has a few other things, but we're just going to really be calculating that base game here. $15.99, and it's estimating a gross revenue of 31 million, adjustable regional pricing of blah, 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 blah. Who cares? Net revenue, $9 million. Now, is that an accurate number? No. This is really just taking a base price, the number of reviews, and making a lot of other calculations based off of that, but it doesn't necessarily need to be super accurate to just this one game. We're going to be doing this for a lot more. Now, you want to do that for as many games as you can in your subgenre, preferably ones released within the last couple of years, to get an idea of what you can expect to earn for your game. Put them in a chart, arrange them by total estimated revenue, and we'll figure out the average revenue for that type of game. It's also worth considering how much these actually cost for the developers to make, especially the outliers. Now, you won't be able to figure out an exact number for that, but you can usually take a glance, and if it looks visually really good, you can usually assume it was on the pricier side to make. And if it doesn't look visually as good, you can assume they cut some corners and it wasn't as expensive to produce. Sometimes that may explain some outliers. If a game looks absolutely horrible, it makes sense it didn't make any money. If it looks like a AAA game by a big studio, it makes sense why it made a bunch of money. Now, if you know the quality of games that you're going to be able to make aren't quite as good as the best ones that you've seen, but also not quite as bad as the worst ones you've seen, you're usually safe trying to take them out when you're trying to calculate your average revenue, but still you want to keep that information for later. Depending on how wide a swing of revenue these different games have, you can use one of 2 types of averages. The mean average takes all these numbers and divides them by the number of games, and the median average is the revenue in the exact middle of this chart. Pick which number you feel comfortable with, and you can make your game assuming that's the estimated revenue. This number is not your budget. If your game has monetary potential, you want to keep your production costs as low as possible so that you fall below the estimated revenue and your game is profitable. To determine how much your game would cost to make, we need a strategy. Overlapping team expertise and monetary potential is strategy, because we need to estimate the time and costs involved with production and see if you can leverage your team's knowledge in this game idea's development. If you're a solo dev who can do art, music, programming, writing, and all the other things your game idea needs to come to fruition, the only serious cost will be the price of materials produced to your game and your time, which is valuable. If your game idea has elements you can't produce, you'll have to either learn how to do it before you start your game, or plan for expanding your team, either through getting partners, hiring employees, or buying pre-made assets for your game. Now, ideally, your team is going to have some sort of expertise that makes this type of game cheap and easy to produce. Either you've made this type of game before and you can just reuse code and assets to make this sort of game again, or you have some special skills or knowledge that puts you at a competitive advantage with other teams that have attempted to make this type of game before. A Summer's End, Hong Kong 1989, is a pretty darn successful visual novel and the first game made by a two-person studio team, Oracle and Bone. These creators are queer Asian women with a passion for 1980s Hong Kong cinema. At a glance, you can tell this uses default Ren'Py UI. These are not programmers, it's a writer and an artist. But they have this particular passion and unique experiences they put in their game, and it stands out in the otome genre. For small teams making big projects, it's usually best to make an MVP, or a minimum viable product, which is the absolute least amount of stuff you can include in your game that produces the core elements of your game idea. You'll want to write down exactly what those core elements are, itemize them down to how many backgrounds, characters, expressions per character, music tracks, sound effects, and an ideal word count, and then keep to those specs. Figure out how much they'll cost to make in time and money, and that's your budget. Once you have that made, you can release it in early access and use revenue from the MVP to fund further development. If it doesn't sell, cut your losses. But if it takes off, you could strategically expand the game to build your player base and rely on other revenue sources to fund development, like DLC, merch, soundtrack, sales, even just asking for more money. This is actually the perfect time to run a Kickstarter, not at the beginning. If a member of your team has expertise in crowdfunding, you can evaluate how it can strategically fit within your development cycle. But a good rule of thumb is you should not run a crowdfunding campaign unless you are certain it will succeed. How can you be certain it'll succeed? You'll have the other element on our chart, a vision. Take your team expertise with a fun concept and you get vision? That doesn't seem quite right. So this is probably the least helpful out of all these elements because, again, this is a very non-scientific framework. So this whole Ikigai chart, it's originally from a Spanish self-help book that was taken out of context, translated, and then somebody claimed it was the Japanese concept of Ikigai to give it some exoticism, and then every industry just made their own weird variant of it. That being said, there is no simple framework to identify if a game idea will be successful or not. There just isn't. This whole exercise is about taking your game idea, thinking it through, and giving yourself some criteria for success. Determine what you want to accomplish that would make you say, oh, this is a successful game. And if a silly chart helps you out with that, it's still pretty useful. So vision here is really, what exactly do you intend to do with this game idea? What does the complete version of this game look like, and what will happen when you put it out into the world? And is it worth doing if you don't think it's fun, you're not sure what players want, or you're not sure if it'll make money, or even if you can make it? Let's talk about that. Game developers aren't always trying to make the next big hit. Sometimes our goals are a bit smaller, and if they are, it means we don't need to hit every one of these categories in the chart. When you're first starting out and all you have is a fun game idea, you might not have the expertise to pull it off. So instead of trying to make the entire game, you'll want to make a prototype, which is a game you create to experiment with gameplay mechanics. The idea is you want to have your game edge into this expertise area so you can get a clear vision of what this game looks like. Otherwise, you might be making a game for friends. You know what your friends like, so make a game for them. You want to know your audience, have a vision, but obviously the stakes are low. It's for your friends. Just have fun with it. For game jam games, you're challenging yourself a little bit more. Game jams usually have some rules and conditions you have to follow and a time limit for you to make your game, so it needs to be something that you have expertise in, and you have to have a vision that aligns within the game jam rules. It also helps if you think it's a fun game idea, but the fun is usually just finishing your game in time. Game jams are about building communities of game devs, so it's just as important to play other people's games. Some of them might suck, some of them might be promising, but the general expectation is it's impressive if you finished a game at all, and sometimes it's more interesting to see what happens when you create stuff under these sorts of pressures. If you're just starting out, that's not a bad place to be at all. But if you're looking to make a name for yourself as a hobbyist game creator, you'll want to make games for exposure. Figure out what type of audience you want to cater to, play those types of games, and gain some insight into what you can do to get the most eyeballs. Maybe you want to focus on an underrepresented player base, build on another popular game type, or focus on a game that would get the most press. Alternatively, portfolio games focus specifically on marketing yourself and your skills for potential employers. You don't need to make big, amazing games. You want to hyper focus at what you're good at and make a game that shows off your skills. For example, if you eventually want to be a writer or narrative designer for AAA games, starting out with a simple visual novel is a perfectly valid way to go about it. Heck, if it's a game you're making and distributing for free, you could even make it a fan game that uses assets from a game you like. If you're an artist, make a game that shows off your art. If you're a programmer, make a game that shows off your knowledge of your preferred game engine. If you're a musician, make a game that's all about music. You don't need an idea in the exact center of this chart for it to be a good idea to go ahead with it. And that bullseye is really only for games where you need them to be financially successful and creatively fulfilling. And honestly, not all of us really need that if a game idea just sorta stays a game idea. A game that you never actually make will always be as good as you imagine it because you never have to challenge its viability against reality. But if you're really in love with an idea, you can't be an impartial judge of its quality. So if you decide to take that idea from your head and put it out into the world, you're gonna get a reality check real quick. Even if you have the best idea for a game ever, that doesn't mean it's gonna actually be successful unless you can make it as good as you imagine it. And this next video should go over the steps you actually need to make it. Also probably this video. The whole channel. Did you subscribe?